The radio crackles with nothing but static, and I let it. White noise suits my mood better than whatever passes for music these days. Rain hammers the windshield of my Crown Vic like it's got a personal grudge, each drop exploding into smaller disappointments that the wipers can't quite sweep away fast enough. I keep the engine running because stopping feels too much like commitment, and I've already made enough poor choices today. Foster Row stretches out before me like a lineup of suspects, each house identical in its 1950s optimism, now weathered into something that looks more like resignation. The streetlights flicker on early, casting everything in that sickly yellow that makes even healthy skin look jaundiced. November dusk settles over Greytown like a wet blanket, the kind that smells of mildew and broken promises. Robert Carpenter stands on his porch, and even from 50 yards away, I can read the worry carved into his shoulders. His uniform looks rumpled, like he's been wearing it for days, and his hands keep moving, checking his watch, adjusting his collar, running through his hair. He's been waiting for me, probably watching the street for the last hour, and that knowledge sits in my stomach like bad coffee. I count them in my head, the cases that started with those 5 words. You're the only one I trust. There was the banker's wife who swore her husband was being poisoned by his business partner. Turned out she was right, but not in the way she thought. The poison was guilt, and it was eating him from the inside after he'd embezzled their retirement fund. Then there was the college kid who insisted his roommate had been replaced by someone else entirely. Kid was having a psychotic break, but his instincts weren't wrong. His roommate had been dealing drugs out of their dorm and using his name on the accounts. The thing about trust is that people only say those words when they're desperate enough to believe in magic. When the logical world has failed them so completely that they're willing to pin their hopes on a washed-up ex-cop who drinks too much and takes cases that real detectives won't touch with a 10-foot pole. Robert shifts his weight from one foot to the other, and I catch a glimpse of his face in the porch light. The man looks like he's aged a decade since I saw him last. Lines I don't remember bracket his mouth, and there's a tremor in his hands that wasn't there before. We used to be partners back when I still believed the badge meant something. Back when I thought justice was more than just a word lawyers use to justify their fees. The partnership ended the way most of them do, with recriminations and silence. I'd pushed too hard on a case involving a missing girl, refused to let it go when the brass wanted it filed away with the other unsolvables. The girl's name was Sarah Chen, and she was 8 years old when she vanished from a foster home that looked perfect on paper. Clean background checks, sterling references, a house that passed every inspection. But something about the foster father's eyes didn't sit right with me, the way they went flat when he talked about Sarah, like she was already gone in his mind. I spent my own money hiring informants, followed leads on my own time, and when that wasn't enough, I may have bent a few rules about search warrants and probable cause. The case went nowhere. Sarah stayed missing, and I got a choice. Early retirement with full benefits, or face an internal investigation that would have ended with me losing the badge anyway. Robert tried to talk me out of walking away. Said the department needed cops who gave a damn, even if we sometimes gave too much of one. But I was tired of fighting a system that seemed designed to protect the wrong people, tired of watching guilty men walk free while their victims stayed buried in files that would never see daylight again. Now he's calling in old debts, and I'm sitting in my car like a coward, watching him wait for me to decide whether his problem is worth crawling back into that particular hell. The smart money says no. The smart money says drive away. Go home to my empty apartment and pretend I never got his call. But there's something in the way he's standing, a fragility that reminds me of the parents I used to break bad news to, the ones who already knew what I was going to tell them, but needed to hear someone else say it out loud. Robert's got that same look, like he's balancing on the edge of a cliff and asking me to either pull him back or give him a push. The rain keeps falling, and the radio keeps crackling, and somewhere in that house behind him is a 10-year-old boy who supposedly whispers the final words of dead children. Part of me wants to believe it's all nonsense, that Robert's grief over losing his wife has finally cracked something essential in his mind. It would be easier that way, cleaner. I could offer him the name of a good therapist and drive away with my conscience mostly intact. But I learned a long time ago that the impossible has a way of being true in this town, especially when children are involved. There's something in the air here, something that clings to the vulnerable and twists them into shapes that shouldn't exist. I've seen enough to know that sometimes the only thing stranger than the truth is our refusal to believe it. My hands are numb from gripping the steering wheel, but I feel a warmth in my chest, an uncomfortable heat that I recognize as guilt. Not just for what I'm about to do, but for what I already know I'm going to find. Because cases that start with, "You're the only one I trust," never end well, and the children are always the ones who pay the price. I turn off the engine. The sudden silence feels like a door closing. The rain follows me up the cracked walkway, spattering against my coat like cold accusations. Robert opens the door before I can knock, his face a map of sleepless nights and unanswered prayers. Up close, the tremor in his hands is worse than I thought, a constant flutter that makes him look like he's trying to shake something loose from his fingers. "Ray?" His voice carries the weight of a man who's been practicing this conversation in his head for weeks. "Thanks for coming." I nod and step inside, immediately hit by the smell of old carpet and burnt coffee. The living room feels smaller than it should, like the walls have been slowly closing in over the years. Heavy curtains block what little daylight remains, and the overhead light casts harsh shadows that make everything look slightly off-kilter. A police scanner sits on the side table, volume turned low but still crackling with distant emergencies. The furniture has that worn-in quality that speaks of too many nights spent waiting for phone calls that never come. Robert's service weapon sits in its holster on the coffee table next to a stack of foster care paperwork and what looks like medical reports. The whole room feels like a holding pattern, a place where time moves differently. Then I see him. Ethan Carpenter sits curled in an oversized armchair like a small animal trying to disappear into the upholstery. He's smaller than I expected for 10 years old, with the kind of pale skin that suggests too much time indoors and not enough sunlight. His dark hair falls across his forehead in uneven strands, and his brown eyes are too large for his face, giving him the look of something that's seen too much too soon. But it's the way he holds himself that catches my attention. Shoulders hunched forward, arms wrapped around his knees, head tilted slightly to one side like he's listening to something the rest of us can't hear. His eyes keep flicking toward the hallway that leads to the back of the house, and every few seconds his lips move soundlessly, as if he's having a conversation with invisible companions. "Ethan," Robert says, his voice carefully gentle. "This is Mr. Marshall, the man I told you about." The boy's gaze slides over to me without really landing, the way you might glance at a piece of furniture you're not sure belongs in the room. He doesn't speak, just continues that subtle rocking motion that makes the chair creak in a rhythm that sounds almost like breathing. I settle into the couch across from him, keeping my movements slow and non-threatening. After 30 years of dealing with traumatized kids, I've learned that the broken ones can smell desperation and authority from a mile away, and both terrify them equally. "Hello, Ethan." I keep my voice low, the same tone I used to use when approaching crime scenes where every word mattered. "Your dad tells me you've been having some trouble sleeping." His head tilts further, and for a moment, I think he's not going to respond. Then his lips part, and what comes out makes my blood turn to ice water in my veins. "She said she missed her brother." His voice is barely above a whisper, but each word carries the weight of absolute certainty. "She said, 'Don't let him forget me.'" The room goes dead silent except for the rain against the windows and the distant crackle of the police scanner. Robert's face has gone the color of old bone, and I can hear him swallowing hard, like he's trying to keep something down. Those words. Jesus Christ, those exact words. I know them because I was there when they found her. Sarah Chen, 8 years old, missing for 3 days before they pulled her body from the storm drain 6 blocks from here. The medical examiner said she'd been alive for at least 2 of those days, probably longer. The final toxicology report showed traces of sedatives in her system, but not enough to kill her. She'd drowned, but slowly, in 6 inches of dirty water, and according to the coroner, her last words, captured on a recording device they'd found clutched in her small fist, were exactly what Ethan just said. Word for word. But that recording was sealed evidence, never released to the public, never mentioned in any newspaper or television report. The only people who knew what Sarah Chen said before she died were the coroner, 2 detectives, and me. The foster father who'd reported her missing was never charged. Clean background, solid alibi, and no physical evidence linking him to her disappearance. The recording device was dismissed as inconclusive, and the case went cold faster than a body in winter water. I look at Ethan, this fragile child who shouldn't know anything about dead girls or final words, and feel something fundamental shift in my understanding of what's possible. His eyes are fixed on that hallway again, and his lips are moving in that soundless conversation, as if he's listening to voices that exist in frequencies the rest of us can't access. "No one told him that," Robert says, his voice cracking like thin ice. "I swear to God, Ray, no one ever told him those words. I made sure of it. I kept every newspaper, every report, every goddamn piece of evidence away from him. He was just a baby when it happened." But Ethan wasn't a baby. He was 6, old enough to remember, old enough to have heard something. Except Robert's right. Those words were never made public. They existed only in a sealed file that's probably buried in some evidence locker downtown, gathering dust with all the other unsolved cases that keep cops awake at night. I watch the boy rock in his chair, his small hands gripping the armrests like he's trying to anchor himself to something solid in a world that keeps shifting beneath his feet. Whatever's happening to him, it's not simple trauma or an overactive imagination. This is something else entirely, something that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up and my instincts scream warnings I don't want to hear. "Ethan," I say carefully, "can you tell me who said those words?" His rocking stops. For a heartbeat, the room is so quiet I can hear my own pulse in my ears. Then he looks directly at me for the first time, and his eyes are older than they should be, filled with a sadness that belongs to someone who's seen the end of too many stories. "The girl by the water," he whispers. "She's still calling for her brother." My mind works the problem like a crossword puzzle with half the clues missing. Detective training says there has to be a logical explanation. Someone leaked the information, Ethan overheard a conversation, read something he shouldn't have, pieced together fragments from adult whispers. But 30 years of police work also taught me to trust my gut, and my gut is telling me that logic just took a swan dive out the window. I lean forward, keeping my voice steady and professional. "Ethan, how long have you been hearing these voices?" The question hits him like a physical blow. His whole body goes rigid, and his hands fly up to cover his ears, pressing so hard against his skull that his knuckles go white. "No, no, no," he whispers, rocking faster now. "They're supposed to be quiet when the grown-ups talk. They promised they'd be quiet." "It's okay," I say, but he's not listening anymore. His eyes have gone wide and unfocused, staring at something in the middle distance that exists only for him. "She says the water was cold," he continues, his voice taking on an odd mechanical quality, like he's reading from a script. "She says her shoes got stuck in the mud and she couldn't run fast enough. She says—" "Ethan." Robert's voice cuts through the boy's recitation, sharp with desperation. "Stop. You don't have to tell us anymore." But Ethan can't seem to stop. The words keep spilling out, fragments of terror and pain that no child should know how to articulate. He says it hurt when the rope got tight. He says he tried to call for his mama, but his voice wouldn't work. He says, "Jesus Christ." The words escape me before I can stop them. I reach out instinctively, wanting to somehow shield him from whatever he's experiencing, but he flinches away from my approach like I'm made of electricity. The silence that follows is worse than the words. Ethan sits there trembling, his breathing shallow and rapid, looking like he might shatter if someone speaks too loudly. His dark hair is damp with sweat, and there are circles under his eyes that belong on a man 3 times his age. This isn't just exhaustion, this is the bone-deep weariness of someone who hasn't had a peaceful moment in months. I've seen this look before, on witnesses who'd survived terrible things, on parents who'd lost children, on cops who'd worked too many brutal cases. It's the expression of someone whose world has fundamentally shifted, who can no longer pretend that safety is anything more than a comfortable illusion. His hands won't stop shaking. Even when he presses them flat against his legs, the tremor continues, like there's something electric running through his nervous system. And every time the room goes completely quiet, when the rain lets up or the police scanner falls silent, he tenses up like he's bracing for impact. "He can't sleep," Robert says quietly, speaking to me but watching his son with the helpless expression of a man who's tried everything and failed. Not really. Maybe 20 minutes at a time before something wakes him up. The doctors say it's night terrors, but they don't understand. It's not dreams he's afraid of. I look at Ethan, this small, broken thing who carries the last words of dead children like stones in his pockets, and feel something twist in my chest. It's not just sympathy, it's recognition. I know what it looks like when the world shows you more than you can handle, when reality becomes too heavy to carry alone. "The voices," I say carefully. "Are they always children?" Ethan nods without looking up, his movements still that careful, controlled way that speaks of someone trying very hard not to fall apart. "Mostly. Sometimes grown-ups, but they're fuzzy, harder to hear. The kids are always clear. How many?" The question seems to physically pain him. His shoulders hunch further inward, and when he answers, his voice is barely audible. 7. No, 8 now. There's a new one since yesterday." Robert's face goes ashen. "Ethan, you didn't tell me about a new one." "She's little," Ethan whispers. "Littler than me." "She keeps asking for her bunny. She says she can't sleep without her bunny." The room feels like it's closing in on itself. I look between Robert and his son, seeing the weight of impossible knowledge settling over them like a shroud. This isn't just trauma or imagination. This is something else entirely, something that makes my 30 years of detective work feel inadequate. "Robert," I say, "you mentioned other children. On the phone, you said there'd been deaths." He runs a hand through his hair, leaving it standing up in uneven spikes. 2 in the past year, maybe more. I've been going through the files, trying to piece it together. Both foster kids. Both in homes that passed every inspection, background check, psychological evaluation. Clean as a whistle on paper. What happened to them? Officially? One was an accidental drowning in a bathtub. The other was ruled a suicide. Pills. But Marcus was only 9 years old, Ray. 9-year-olds don't know enough about dosage to kill themselves that efficiently. And Jenny... He pauses, swallowing hard. Jenny was found in 6 inches of water. The report said she slipped and hit her head, but there were no signs of trauma, no bruising. She just drowned, like Sarah Chen, like the girl whose words Ethan somehow knows by heart. The foster families? Different homes, different families. No obvious connections, but there's something. He trails off, glancing at Ethan, who's gone back to staring at the hallway with that listening expression. "What?" "All the placements went through the same caseworker, Frank Donovan. He's got a reputation for taking the hard cases, the kids nobody else wants. Trauma survivors, kids with behavioral problems, the ones who've been bounced around the system. He's like a saint, according to his file. Takes them in, gives them stability, helps them heal." The hair on my arms prickles. "In my experience, saints are usually the ones you need to watch closest. And you think?" "I don't know what I think." Robert admits. But my son is hearing the last words of dead children, and every time he tells me about a new voice, another foster kid turns up dead within days. I can't prove anything, can't even explain how it's possible, but I know something's wrong. And I know you're the only one who might believe me. There it is again. Those 5 words that always lead me down roads I have no business traveling. I look at Ethan, still trembling in his chair, carrying the weight of voices that shouldn't exist, and feel that familiar heat in my chest. Not guilt this time, but something worse, responsibility. I'll need to see the files, I hear myself say. All of them. The foster placement records, the death certificates, everything you can get me. Robert's relief is so palpable I can almost taste it. You'll take the case? I watch Ethan whisper something to the empty air, his lips moving in that soundless conversation with the dead, and know I'm about to step into something that will change everything. Again. Yeah, I say, surprised by the certainty in my own voice. I'll take it. Even though I don't know if I'm chasing a murderer, a haunting, or a traumatized boy's fractured psyche. Even though every instinct tells me this case will end badly, with more questions than answers and more ghosts than I can handle. Sometimes you take a case not because you think you can solve it, but because walking away would be worse than whatever's waiting in the dark. Thunder rolls across Greytown like the footsteps of something massive and angry, shaking the windows of my Crown Vic as I park across from the Donovan house. The storm has been building all evening, turning the sky the color of old bruises, and now it unleashes itself with the kind of violence that makes you believe in Old Testament wrath. Ethan sits beside me in the passenger seat, his small frame dwarfed by the adult seatbelt, staring at the Victorian monstrosity that looms before us. The house squats on its corner lot like something that's been waiting decades for exactly this moment, its gabled roof and ornate trim casting shadows that seem to move independently of the streetlights. You sure about this? I ask, though I already know the answer. The boy's been getting more agitated all evening, his whispered conversations with invisible companions growing more frequent and desperate. Whatever's calling to him from inside that house, it's not taking no for an answer. He nods without looking away from the building. They're louder here, all of them together. The Donovan house has a reputation in Greytown, the kind of stories that get passed down through generations of cops and social workers. Built in 1892 by a railroad baron who lost 3 children to scarlet fever, it's been a foster home on and off for the better part of 6 decades. The locals call it the Stone Tape House, claiming it records voices and plays them back at the worst possible moments. Most people dismiss it as small-town superstition, but most people haven't sat next to a 10-year-old who channels the final words of murder victims. Lightning splits the sky as we approach the front porch, illuminating the peeling paint and warped shutters in stark detail. The windows are dark except for a single light in what looks like the kitchen, casting a sickly yellow glow that makes the rain-soaked yard look like a crime scene. Frank Donovan isn't home. Robert confirmed he's at some foster care conference downstate, but something tells me that won't matter. Whatever Ethan's hearing in there doesn't need the living to make itself known. The front door is locked, but Robert provided a key, along with his blessing to conduct what he generously called an unofficial wellness check. The lock turns with a sound like old bones breaking, and the door swings open to reveal a hallway that stretches back into darkness deeper than the storm outside. The smell hits me first, a mixture of old wood, industrial disinfectant, and something else underneath it all, something sweet and cloying that makes my stomach turn. It's the smell of a place where too many sad stories have ended, where children have learned that safety is just another word adults use to lie to themselves. Ethan steps across the threshold like he's walking into a church, his movements careful and reverent. The floorboards creak under our feet with sounds that seem too loud in the oppressive silence, each step echoing through rooms we can't see. The walls are covered in family photos, Dozens of them, showing smiling children in various combinations, all with the same man I recognize as Frank Donovan from his file photo. But something's wrong with the pictures. It takes me a moment to figure out what, and then it hits me. The children never appear in more than one photo. Each image shows a different group, different faces, as if the house's residents are constantly changing, like a revolving door of temporary happiness. "This way," Ethan whispers, his voice barely audible over the thunder. He moves through the house with the certainty of someone following a map only he can see, leading me past a living room filled with plastic-covered furniture and a kitchen that looks like it hasn't been used for cooking in years. The hallway seems to stretch longer than the house should allow, doorways opening onto rooms that feel too small and too empty. Ethan's breathing grows more shallow with each step, and his hands have started that trembling again, worse than before. When we reach the back of the house, he stops so suddenly I almost walk into him. "Here," he says, pointing at a doorway that leads to what must be a back bedroom. "This is where she is." The room beyond is smaller than the others, with a single window that looks out onto the overgrown backyard. A twin bed sits against one wall, made up with military precision, and a small dresser holds the kind of generic children's books that come from charity drives. But it's not the furniture that makes my skin crawl. It's the way the air feels, thick and oppressive, like the moments before a lightning strike. Ethan moves to the center of the room and stops, his whole body going rigid. For a long moment he just stands there, head tilted in that listening posture I'm learning to dread. Then his face crumples, and tears start sliding down his cheeks. "He said it hurt," he whispers, his voice taking on that mechanical quality again. He said, "Thank you for making it stop." The words hit me like a physical blow. I know them, just like I knew Sarah Chen's final message. They belonged to Marcus Webb, the 9-year-old who supposedly killed himself with an overdose of sleeping pills. The coroner found a digital recorder in his pocket, the kind kids use for school projects, containing those exact words spoken in a child's voice, thick with pain and gratitude. Another sealed piece of evidence, another impossible thing that Ethan shouldn't know. I watch him point at a spot on the floor near the foot of the bed, his hand shaking so badly it looks like palsy. "Right there," he says. That's where he said goodbye. The floorboards in that spot look no different from the others, but when I kneel down and run my hand across them, I feel something that makes my breath catch. Scratches in the wood, shallow but deliberate, forming letters that spell out a single word: help. Lightning illuminates the room in stark black and white, and for just a moment I swear I see them. Shadowy figures of children standing in the corners, their faces turned toward me with expressions of desperate hope. Then the darkness returns, and I'm alone with Ethan and the weight of terrible knowledge. I pull out my phone and start taking pictures of everything: the scratches in the floor, the room's layout, the view from the window. Then I call Robert and ask him to email me every foster placement record he can access for this address. While I wait for the files to arrive, I start a new notebook, one that I hope I'll never have to show anyone. On the first page, I write Sarah Chen's name and her final words. On the second, Marcus Webb. By the time I'm finished going through Robert's files, I have 7 names, 7 sets of last words, and 7 children who died in foster homes that looked perfect on paper. But it's the gaps in the records that chill me most. Placement forms with no corresponding closure documents, children who vanished from the system without explanation, files that should exist but don't. As if someone has been very carefully erasing evidence of lives that ended too soon. Ethan stands in the center of the room, still talking to voices I can't hear, collecting the final words of children who trusted the wrong person. And I sit on the floor of a house that's seen too much death, writing down names that should have lived long enough to be forgotten, trying to build a case around evidence that exists only in the nightmares of a traumatized boy. Outside, the storm continues to rage, and somewhere in the darkness, Frank Donovan is driving home to a house full of ghosts and secrets that refuse to stay buried. The rain falls for 3 days straight, turning Foster Row into a river of regret and yellow police tape that flutters like prayer flags in the wind. Water runs down Robert's windows in sheets, distorting the world outside until it looks like something viewed through the bottom of a bottle. I've been living at his kitchen table, surrounded by case files that multiply like cancer cells, each folder containing another child who slipped through cracks that shouldn't exist in a civilized world. Ethan sits across from me, pretending to care about the card tricks I learned from a magician who worked crime scenes for the LAPD. The kid's too polite to tell me my sleight of hand is rusty, but his attention keeps drifting to places it shouldn't go. Every few minutes his head tilts toward the hallway or the basement door or the space just over my left shoulder where nothing exists except shadows and the smell of brewing coffee. The files spread before me tell a story that makes my teeth ache. 12 children in the past 5 years, all placed in foster homes that looked pristine on paper. Background checks clean as mountain air, references that read like love letters, homes that passed every inspection with flying colors. But scratch beneath the surface, dig into the gaps between the official reports, and you find patterns that make your skin crawl. Pick a card, I tell Ethan, fanning out the deck with hands that shake from too much caffeine and too little sleep. Any card. He selects the 7 of hearts without looking, his eyes fixed on something in the corner where the kitchen meets the hallway. His breathing has gone shallow again, that rapid flutter that means he's hearing things the rest of us can't access. I've learned to recognize the signs, the way his pupils dilate, the slight forward lean of his body as if he's straining to catch whispers carried on frequencies that exist only for the broken. "Don't leave the window open tonight," he says suddenly, his voice taking on that mechanical quality I've come to dread. The words are too precise, too adult for a 10-year-old's vocabulary. "The cold makes it harder to breathe." My hand freezes halfway through the card trick. Those words belong to Jenny Morrison, the 7-year-old who supposedly drowned in 6 inches of bathwater. Her final recording, found in a waterproof case tucked beneath her pillow, contained exactly those syllables. Another piece of evidence that was sealed, filed away, forgotten by everyone except the ghosts who refuse to let their stories die. "Ethan." I keep my voice steady, professional, the same tone I used when interviewing witnesses who'd seen things that couldn't be real. "Who said that?" He blinks. And for a moment he's just a kid again, confused and frightened by words that came out of his mouth without permission. "The girl with the braids." "She's been standing by the sink for 2 days now, waiting for someone to listen." I look at the empty space beside the kitchen sink, seeing nothing but afternoon shadows and the reflection of rain-distorted light. But Ethan's gaze tracks movement I can't detect, following something invisible as it moves through the room with purpose and weight. The coffee in my cup has gone cold hours ago, but I keep drinking it anyway, using the bitter taste to anchor myself to something real and tangible. The alternative, accepting that a traumatized child can somehow channel the final words of murder victims, leads down paths my rational mind refuses to explore. Yet here I sit, surrounded by evidence that shouldn't exist, watching a boy carry conversations with the dead like other kids collect baseball cards. "It hurts," Ethan whispers, his small hands pressed flat against the table's surface. "But thank you for holding my hand." Marcus Webb's words. The 9-year-old who died with a smile on his face and enough sedatives in his system to kill a grown man. His final recording captured those exact syllables, spoken with the gratitude of someone whose pain was finally ending. The medical examiner noted defensive wounds on his arms, but the case was closed as suicide before anyone could ask why a child would thank his killer. Robert moves through the house like a ghost himself, checking locks and windows with the paranoid precision of a man who knows his world has shifted into something unrecognizable. Every few hours he stops by the kitchen to refill my coffee or bring Ethan something to eat, but his eyes carry the hollow look of someone who's seen too much truth for one lifetime. The files tell their story in blood and bureaucracy. Children placed with Frank Donovan's approved families. Children who thrived for weeks or months before tragedy struck with surgical precision. Always accidents, always inexplicable, always leaving behind foster parents who were devastated but never quite devastated enough. The paperwork flows like water, washing away questions before they can take root. But it's the gaps that terrify me most, the spaces between placement and death where records should exist, but don't. Phone calls that were never logged, visits that happened off the books, medical appointments that vanished from scheduling systems like they'd never occurred. Someone has been very careful to erase the evidence of systematic murder, leaving behind only the ghosts that speak through broken children. Ethan gets up from the table and starts pacing, drawn to specific spots in Robert's house like a dowsing rod seeking water. He stops in front of the basement door, head tilted in that listening posture, then moves to the space beneath the staircase where shadows pool like dark water. Each location triggers that same vacant expression, that horrible mechanical repetition of words that belong to the dead. "I'm sorry I couldn't be braver," he says to the empty air beneath the stairs. "Tell Mama I tried to come home." Another voice, another child whose final words were recorded and sealed away. The system protects evidence better than it protects children, locking away truth in vaults that will never see daylight while the killers walk free under different names and cleaner backgrounds. I watch Ethan move through the house, collecting last words like other children gather flowers, and feel something fundamental break inside my chest. This isn't just about one disturbed foster parent or a handful of tragic accidents. This is bigger, deeper, more carefully orchestrated than anything I've encountered in 30 years of chasing monsters who wear human faces. The rain keeps falling, and the voices keep whispering, and somewhere in the gap between the possible and the impossible, children are dying while adults look the other way. I push the investigation like a man digging his own grave, one shovelful of bureaucratic dirt at a time. The records sprawl across Robert's dining room table in an archaeology of administrative neglect. Foster care files stacked beside death certificates, placement forms bleeding into medical reports that raise more questions than they answer. The pattern lives in the spaces between official documents, in the careful omissions and sanitized language that transforms murder into misfortune. The first thing you learn about investigating child welfare cases is that the system protects itself better than it protects children. Every inquiry gets bounced between departments like a hot potato, each clerk citing privacy laws and jurisdictional boundaries, while the real evidence disappears into filing cabinets that might as well be black holes. I've spent 2 decades navigating this maze, and I know which doors to push and which bureaucrats to charm. But this case feels different. The walls are higher, the doors more firmly locked. Frank Donovan's name appears in files like a watermark, barely visible until you hold the paperwork up to the light and see how his influence permeates every level of the system. He's been working child placement for 23 years, specializing in what the social workers euphemistically call challenging cases. Kids with behavioral problems, trauma histories, psychiatric medications that make other foster parents uncomfortable. The saint of lost children, according to his performance reviews. But saints don't usually have this many bodies in their wake. I trace the connections with colored pens, drawing lines between names and dates, until Robert's dining room looks like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Red ink for the children who died, blue for the foster families, green for Donovan's involvement. The pattern emerges like a photograph developing in chemical solution, always the same sequence, always the same careful choreography of placement, tragedy, and administrative amnesia. The records that should exist don't. Medical files for children who died of supposedly natural causes vanish from hospital databases. School reports that might contain signs of abuse get mysteriously lost in district office moves. Even the autopsy reports feel sanitized, clinical observations that read like they were written by someone more concerned with legal liability than truth. Maria Santos, age 8, placed with the Henderson family in March. Dead of accidental poisoning in July, found in their basement with a bottle of drain cleaner that somehow found its way past 3 different child safety locks. The toxicology report notes, consistent with accidental ingestion, but doesn't explain why a bright 8-year-old would drink something that smelled like industrial solvent. The placement was approved by Frank Donovan. The case was closed by his recommendation. David Kim, age 11, placed with the Rodriguez family in September. Dead of complications from a fall downstairs in December, despite the fact that the injury patterns suggested repeated trauma over several weeks. The medical examiner's report mentions possible evidence of prior abuse, but the investigation was terminated when the foster parents agreed to voluntary surrender of their license. The placement was arranged by Frank Donovan. The closure was expedited at his request. The names pile up like autumn leaves, each one representing a life that ended too soon and a system that failed too completely. I count 17 deaths in Donovan's caseload over the past 5 years, a statistical anomaly that should have triggered investigations, reviews, systemic changes. Instead, it generated commendations for his dedication to serving the community's most vulnerable children. The foster families themselves read like character sketches from a feel-good television show. Clean backgrounds, stable finances, glowing references from neighbors and employers. They pass every psychological evaluation, satisfy every home inspection, answer every question with exactly the right combination of empathy and determination. Perfect families for damaged children, at least on paper. But dig deeper, follow the money trails and employment histories, and you find gaps that make your skin crawl. The Henderson family moved to Greytown 6 months before taking in Maria Santos, leaving behind a trail of abandoned jobs and broken leases that suggests people running from something they can't name. The Rodriguez family had no children of their own, despite 12 years of marriage. No pets, despite claiming to love animals, no photographs of extended family, despite insisting on strong family values. They're not families at all. They're performances, carefully constructed identities designed to pass inspection and disappear when their usefulness ends. The kind of deep cover operations that usually involve federal agencies and witness protection programs, not small-town foster care systems. I cross-reference addresses, phone numbers, employment records, looking for the threads that connect these supposedly random families to something larger and more sinister. The work burns my eyes and makes my hands cramp, but it's good, honest police work, the kind of methodical investigation that builds cases brick by brick until the structure becomes undeniable. And always, threading through every document like a poisonous vine, is Frank Donovan's signature. His recommendations, his evaluations, his careful assessments that transform potential killers into loving families and dead children into tragic accidents. The man has built a machine for manufacturing orphans, and the system protects it because the machine works exactly as designed. The phone rings at 3 a.m, jolting me awake from dreams of filing cabinets that bleed. Robert answers with the careful alertness of someone who's been expecting bad news, his voice tight with the kind of fear that comes from knowing too much about how the world really works. "Another one," he says, hanging up the phone with hands that shake like autumn leaves. 8-year-old girl named Lily Torres, found dead in her foster home this morning. Apparent heart failure, according to the preliminary report. I feel something cold settle in my stomach, the familiar weight of inevitability that comes with cases that refuse to stay in the past. "Let me guess," I say. "Placement arranged by Frank Donovan." Robert nods, his face gray in the pre-dawn darkness. She'd been with the family for 6 weeks. Perfect placement, according to the file. No red flags, no warning signs, no reason to think anything was wrong. except for the fact that 8-year-olds don't usually die of heart failure unless someone helps them along, and except for the fact that Frank Donovan's perfect placements have a way of ending with small bodies and large bureaucratic silences. I reach for my notebook, adding another name to the list that grows longer every day. Somewhere in this house, Ethan is probably hearing new voices, collecting new last words from children who trusted the wrong people. And somewhere in Greytown, Frank Donovan is preparing another placement, another performance, another perfectly orchestrated tragedy. The investigation is no longer about proving the impossible. It's about stopping the inevitable before it claims another child who doesn't deserve to become just another statistic in a system that values order more than justice. Robert stands in his kitchen doorway like a man watching his house burn down, coffee mug trembling in hands that have seen too much official violence to shake at ordinary horrors. The morning light filtering through rain-streaked windows makes his uniform look faded, worn thin by years of carrying other people's tragedies. When he speaks, his voice carries the weight of someone who's learned that knowledge can be more dangerous than ignorance. You dig too deep in this town, Ray, and you find yourself buried with what you uncover. The words hang in the air between us like smoke from a funeral pyre. I've seen good cops disappear into cases that ask the wrong questions. I've seen files vanish overnight, witnesses relocate without forwarding addresses, evidence that gets lost in storage rooms that somehow catch fire. He's not talking about supernatural forces or ghostly interventions. He's talking about human monsters with badges and briefcases, people who've built careers on looking the other way, while children disappear into bureaucratic black holes. The kind of institutional corruption that runs so deep it becomes indistinguishable from the foundation itself. But I've already crossed that line, already committed to following this case wherever it leads, even if it leads to my own professional grave. Some investigations become personal not because you choose them, but because they choose you, marking you like a scar that never quite heals properly. I ignore Robert's warning the way I've ignored every sensible piece of advice I've received in the past 30 years. Ethan and I return to the Donovan house in the gray afternoon light, the Victorian monstrosity looking even more sinister in daylight than it did during the storm. The rain has stopped, but the air still feels heavy with moisture and menace, as if the atmosphere itself is holding its breath. The house feels different this time, colder, more oppressive, like something fundamental has shifted in the days since our last visit. The hallways seem narrower, the ceilings lower, as if the building is slowly contracting around its secrets. Ethan moves through the rooms with the purposeful stride of someone following invisible breadcrumbs, his small frame casting shadows that seem too large for the available light. "Downstairs," he says without explanation, pointing toward a door I hadn't noticed during our previous visit. It's tucked beneath the main staircase, painted the same color as the surrounding walls, designed to be overlooked by casual observers. The kind of architectural camouflage that suggests someone had reasons to keep certain areas hidden from inspection. The basement stairs creak under our weight, each step echoing through darkness that feels older than the house itself. The air down here smells of damp earth and industrial disinfectant, with an underlying sweetness that makes my stomach turn. A single bulb hangs from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows that transform ordinary objects into grotesque shapes. The basement is larger than it should be, extending beyond the footprint of the house above. Storage boxes line the walls, labeled with years and initials that mean nothing to me but everything to the children who passed through this place. A workbench sits against the far wall, its surface scarred with knife marks and stained with substances I don't want to identify. Ethan stops in the center of the room, his head tilted in that listening posture that makes my skin crawl. For a long moment he just stands there, breathing in shallow gasps, his eyes fixed on something I can't see. Then he walks to a corner where the concrete floor meets the stone foundation, kneels down, and picks up something so small I almost miss it. A marble, Clear glass with a blue spiral in the center, the kind children collect in jars and trade like currency in elementary school playgrounds. Nothing remarkable about it except for the way Ethan holds it, cradling the sphere in his palm like it's made of crystallized pain. His face goes blank, and when he speaks, it's not his voice that emerges from his throat. The words come out in a higher pitch, with the careful pronunciation of someone who's learned English as a second language, carrying the weight of desperate love and terrible finality. "Tell my brother I'm sorry I couldn't wait," the voice says through Ethan's mouth. "Tell him the medicine didn't hurt as much as they said it would. Tell him I kept his picture with me until the very end." The marble falls from Ethan's suddenly nerveless fingers, rolling across the concrete floor with a sound like small bones breaking. "I know those words, just as I've known all the others. They belong to Lily Torres, the 8-year-old who supposedly died of heart failure just yesterday morning. But these aren't her final words as recorded by any medical device or overheard by any witness. These are the thoughts she carried into death, the message she wanted someone to deliver to the brother she'll never see again. I pull out my phone and start photographing everything. The basement layout, the storage boxes, the workbench with its ominous stains. Then I call Robert and ask him to access Lily Torres's intake records to find out everything the system knows about her placement history and family background. The files arrive via email 20 minutes later, and reading them makes my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Lily Torres had a brother named Miguel, age 12, currently placed in a group home 3 counties away. She'd been separated from him 6 months ago when their parents died in a car accident, told that temporary placement would keep them together in the long run. She'd been asking about him in every phone call to her caseworker, begging to know when they could be reunited. The placement with the Donovan-approved family was supposed to be the first step toward that reunification. Instead, it became the last stop on a journey that ended in a basement that smells of disinfectant and broken dreams. I find Miguel's contact information in the files and call the group home, speaking to a counselor who confirms what I already know will be true. The boy has been asking about his sister every day, waiting for news that will never come. He has a photograph of Lily that he keeps in his pocket, the same picture she mentioned in her final message, channeled through a traumatized child's supernatural gift. The system separated them to protect them, then killed one and lied to the other. Standard operating procedure for an institution that measures success by the tidiness of its paperwork rather than the safety of its charges. Frank Donovan orchestrated the separation, recommended the placement, and will probably handle the notification of Lily's death with the same clinical efficiency he brings to all his cases. Standing in that basement, surrounded by evidence of systematic murder disguised as administrative efficiency, I finally understand the true scope of what we're facing. This isn't just about one disturbed individual or a handful of tragic accidents. This is about an entire network of people who've turned child welfare into a carefully managed slaughter protected by institutional inertia and willful blindness. The dead children whose voices Ethan carries aren't just victims, they're witnesses to a conspiracy that reaches into every level of the system designed to protect them. And we're the only ones listening to their testimony. The only ones who believe their accusations, the only ones who might be able to stop the machine before it claims another innocent life. The brick comes through Robert's front window at 2:17 in the morning, exploding glass across the living room floor like crystallized violence. The sound tears me from dreams of children's voices and basement shadows, launching me from the couch where I'd been pretending to sleep with my gun within easy reach. Robert appears in the hallway, service weapon drawn, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who's been expecting this exact scenario. We approach the debris like a bomb squad examining evidence, flashlight beams cutting through darkness to illuminate scattered glass and a chunk of red brick that sits in the center of Robert's coffee table like an accusation. No one speaks for the first few minutes. We both know that words thrown through windows at this hour aren't usually accompanied by polite conversation. The message is wrapped around the brick with a rubber band, written on lined paper in the careful block letters of someone who learned penmanship from nuns and fear from professionals. The handwriting belongs to a child, but the words carry the weight of adult malice. The dead don't forgive snitches. Each letter is formed with the deliberate precision of someone who wanted to make sure the message would be clearly understood, even in poor light. I examine the paper under Robert's kitchen lamp, looking for watermarks or other identifying features that might lead us back to its source. Standard school notebook paper, the kind sold in every discount store between here and the state capitol. The pencil marks show pressure variations that suggest someone writing under stress, the kind of controlled panic that comes from being forced to create evidence of your own participation in something terrible. But it's the handwriting itself that makes my skin crawl. Too neat, too uniform, as if the child who wrote it had been practicing these specific words for hours before committing them to paper. The kind of coached performance that speaks of adult supervision and childhood terror, of small hands guided by larger ones that know exactly how much pressure to apply. Kids don't usually threaten cops with theological concepts, I tell Robert, though we both know this isn't the work of any ordinary child. Someone is using children as messengers, turning them into accomplices in their own exploitation. The same systematic abuse that's been killing foster kids is now being weaponized against anyone who asks inconvenient questions. Robert double-checks every lock, every window, every potential entry point with the methodical paranoia of someone who's realized his own home is no longer safe. The house feels smaller now, more vulnerable, like a cardboard fort facing a hurricane. We both know that whoever threw this brick could have done much worse, that the message is a warning rather than an attack. The sound of breaking glass wakes Ethan, and when I check on him, I find the boy sitting up in his makeshift bed, staring at the ceiling with the hollow expression of someone who's been expecting bad news all his life. His small hands are pressed against his ears, but I can tell from his posture that the voices are louder tonight, more insistent, carrying messages that no child should have to receive. "They're angry," he whispers when he sees me in the doorway. All of them together, talking at the same time. They want people to know what happened to them. I sit on the edge of his bed, careful not to touch him without permission. Traumatized children have their own geography of safety, invisible boundaries that adults cross at their peril. What are they saying? That some grown-ups hurt kids on purpose. That some grown-ups get paid to look the other way. That some grown-ups think dead children can't tell secrets. His voice carries the mechanical quality I've learned to dread, words flowing through him like water through a broken pipe. The nightmare hits him an hour later. A violent thrashing that leaves bruises on his arms shaped like adult handprints. I watch him fight off invisible attackers, his small fists swinging at threats that exist only in the space between sleep and waking. When he finally settles, the marks on his skin look fresh, angry, as if someone has been holding him down while he struggled. Robert examines the bruises with the clinical detachment of someone who's documented too much violence against children. "These aren't self-inflicted," he says quietly. "The finger placement is wrong, the pressure pattern's too consistent. Someone did this to him, but no one was in the room." I checked every few minutes, drawn by restless energy and the paranoid certainty that our investigation has made us targets. The house was secure, the windows locked, the doors monitored. Whatever left those marks on Ethan's arms doesn't need physical access to inflict damage. I spend the rest of the night pacing Robert's living room, replaying every word Ethan has spoken, trying to hear the pattern hidden in the chaos of supernatural testimony. The voices he channels aren't random. They're connected by more than just their shared fate. Each child died alone, but they're finding each other in whatever space exists beyond death, forming a collective that demands justice from the living. My own daughter's face keeps intruding into my thoughts, The way she looked in those final moments when the cancer had won and the machines couldn't help anymore. Sarah was older than these foster children when she died, old enough to understand what was happening, old enough to say goodbye properly. But in the end, death is still death, and children still shouldn't have to face it alone. Sometimes the voices just want someone to listen, Ethan tells me when dawn finally breaks through the clouds, his small voice carrying wisdom that belongs to someone much older. Sometimes they want revenge. The distinction chills me more than the supernatural elements of this case. Justice and revenge occupy different territories in the moral landscape, and I'm no longer sure which side of that line we're walking. The system has failed these children so completely that the dead might be justified in seeking solutions the living world can't provide. I look at Ethan, this fragile conduit for the testimony of murdered children, and realize we're not just investigating a series of crimes, we're serving as jury for accusations that will never see a conventional courtroom. The evidence exists only in the voices of the dead and the bruises on a traumatized boy's arms. Testimony that would be inadmissible in any legal proceeding, but undeniable to anyone willing to listen. The brick sits on Robert's coffee table like a gauntlet thrown down by forces that want us to stop asking questions. But the voices are getting louder, more insistent, and Ethan is running out of strength to carry their messages. Time is becoming a luxury we can't afford, and justice is becoming a commodity that might have to be purchased with methods that would make honest cops uncomfortable. Frank Donovan moves through Greytown like a man who knows he's being watched but isn't particularly concerned about it. I tail him for 3 days, watching him navigate his carefully choreographed routine with the precision of someone who's spent decades perfecting the art of appearing normal. Coffee at the same diner every morning, case files reviewed at the same corner table, visits to foster homes that follow routes planned with military efficiency. But he's never alone, never vulnerable, never in a position where uncomfortable questions might corner him into uncomfortable answers. There's always a colleague nearby, always a witness to establish his whereabouts, always someone ready to vouch for his character and dedication to the community's most vulnerable children. The man has built a human shield out of institutional respectability, and it moves with him like a protective bubble. I watch him shake hands with judges, share lunch with social workers, exchange pleasantries with police officers who treat him like a beloved uncle. The network that protects him isn't a conspiracy, it's something worse than that. It's a culture, a way of seeing the world that transforms systematic child murder into administrative efficiency. These people aren't evil. They're simply convinced that Frank Donovan represents everything good about public service. The surveillance teaches me nothing except that my target is untouchable through conventional means. Every move he makes is witnessed, documented, justified by paperwork that exists in triplicate. He's not hiding from investigation. He's hiding in plain sight, protected by the assumption that someone so visible, so respected, so thoroughly integrated into the system couldn't possibly be anything other than what he appears to be. It's Ethan who breaks the case open, but not in any way I could have predicted. The boy wakes from his afternoon nap with the focused intensity of someone who's received urgent instructions from sources beyond normal perception. Without explanation, he puts on his shoes and walks to Robert's front door, waiting with the patient certainty of someone who knows exactly where he needs to go. "The school," he says when I ask where we're headed. The old one. They're all waiting there. The abandoned elementary school squats on the edge of Greytown like a monument to municipal neglect, its red brick facade stained with decades of rain and indifference. The building has been empty for 8 years, ever since budget cuts forced the district to consolidate its facilities, leaving behind a shell that serves no purpose except to remind people of better times that probably never existed anyway. Chain-link fencing surrounds the property, topped with razor wire that's meant to keep children out rather than in. The windows are boarded up with plywood that bears the signatures of every teenage vandal who's discovered that abandoned buildings make excellent canvases for artistic expression. But the real security isn't the fence or the wire. It's the collective assumption that nothing important could possibly be hidden in a place so obviously forsaken. Ethan leads me around the building's perimeter with the confidence of someone following a map printed in languages only he can read. We find the breach in the fence behind the old gymnasium, where weather and time have created an opening just large enough for determined trespassers. The boy slips through without hesitation, moving across the overgrown playground like he's been here before. The building's rear entrance yields to Robert's lockpicks with embarrassing ease, suggesting that we're not the first people to find our way inside. The hallways smell of mildew and institutional despair, their walls lined with empty bulletin boards that once displayed children's artwork and achievement charts. Our footsteps echo through corridors designed to contain the sound of young voices, now silent except for the whisper of wind through broken windows. Ethan navigates the maze of classrooms and administrative offices with supernatural certainty, past the principal's office with its empty desk and the library with its missing books. He stops in front of a door marked Storage, its surface scratched and dented by years of maintenance equipment and forgotten supplies. But when he opens it, the room beyond isn't what any building plan would suggest. The storage room contains stairs that descend into darkness deeper than the building's foundation should allow. The steps are wooden, old enough to predate the school itself, leading down to a basement that exists in architectural impossibility. The air grows colder as we descend, carrying scents of earth and stone that belong to places much older than Greytown's municipal records. The basement room stretches beyond the reach of our flashlight beams, its walls constructed from stone blocks that bear the marks of hand tools and manual labor. This isn't part of the school. It's something else entirely, something that was here before the education system decided this location would be suitable for children. The kind of space that accumulates history in its corners and refuses to let go of the stories it's witnessed. Ethan walks directly to the far wall, where shadows pool like spilled ink. His small hand traces patterns carved into the stone, letters and words that emerge from the darkness as my flashlight follows his movements. Names, dozens of them, scratched into the rock with fingernails and improvised tools by hands too small to reach very high. Lily is there, carved in fresh letters that still show stone dust in their grooves. Below it, Marcus and Sarah and Jenny, names I recognize from case files and Ethan's supernatural testimony. But there are others, many others, names that stretch back years and represent children who never made it into any official records. Children who disappeared so completely that the system never bothered to notice they were gone. The wall tells a story that no bureaucrat wants to read. A chronicle of systematic murder disguised as administrative oversight. Each name represents a life that ended in this basement, a child who discovered too late that the adults they trusted were part of something much darker than simple neglect or incompetence. I count 47 names on the wall, 47 children who passed through Frank Donovan's carefully curated network of foster families before ending up in this stone tomb beneath an abandoned school. Some of the names are so old the carving has been worn smooth by time and moisture, suggesting this operation has been running for decades under various administrative guises. But it's not just names carved into the stone. There are messages, too, final words scratched into rock by children who knew they were going to die, but wanted to leave some evidence of their existence. Desperate pleas for help that no one was positioned to receive, accusations against adults whose names are protected by institutional immunity, expressions of love for siblings and parents who will never know what happened to them. They wanted someone to remember, Ethan says quietly, his small voice echoing in the stone chamber like a prayer in a cathedral. They wanted their stories to be true, even if nobody believed them. The basement isn't just a murder site, it's a memorial, a place where children used their final moments to create testimony that would outlast their killers. Each name carved into stone is an act of defiance against a system designed to erase them, proof that they existed and mattered and deserved better than the world they received. Standing in that chamber, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of decades of systematic child murder, I finally understand the true scope of what we're fighting. This isn't just about Frank Donovan or corrupted foster families or institutional cover-ups. This is about an entire culture that values administrative convenience more than human life, that treats vulnerable children as expendable resources in a machine designed to generate profit and maintain order. We're not just chasing one killer. We're up against a system built to forget its victims, protected by people who benefit from selective blindness and deliberate ignorance. The children whose names cover this wall aren't just murder victims. They're witnesses to a conspiracy that reaches into every level of authority designed to protect them. And somewhere above us, in the bureaucratic maze of Greytown's social services, Frank Donovan continues his work, secure in the knowledge that dead children don't file complaints and buried evidence doesn't testify in court. The air in Greytown tastes different now, metallic and thick, like the moments before lightning splits the sky. Word travels fast in small places, carried on whispers that slip through coffee shop conversations and police station hallways like smoke under doorways. Someone found something in the old school. Someone knows things they shouldn't know. Someone is asking questions that make important people uncomfortable. I can feel the change in the way shopkeepers avoid eye contact, the way conversations stop when I walk into rooms, the way even the weather seems to press down on the town with unusual weight. The sky has been building toward a storm for 3 days now, pregnant clouds hanging low enough to scrape the church steeples, but the rain holds back like it's waiting for permission to fall. Robert's living room has become our command center and our fortress, files and evidence photos spread across every surface like the scattered pieces of a puzzle that reveals something too terrible to assemble completely. The brick sits in the center of the coffee table like a shrine to institutional malice, its message still wrapped around the red clay in a child's careful handwriting that makes my skin crawl every time I look at it. I spend the night on Robert's couch, my service revolver tucked beneath the cushions where my hand can find it without conscious thought. Sleep comes in 20-minute fragments, interrupted by every settling board and shifting shadow, my nervous system calibrated to threats that might manifest as footsteps on the porch, or vehicles that slow down too much when passing the house. The paranoia feels justified. We've stirred up something that reaches into every level of authority in this town, and cornered animals have a way of becoming dangerous. The house settles around us with sounds that seem too deliberate, too purposeful. The heating system cycles on and off with mechanical breathing that matches the rhythm of someone trying to stay quiet. The refrigerator hums with electrical urgency that makes me check the windows every time the pitch changes. Even the police scanner sitting on Robert's side table seems to whisper more secrets than usual, its static-filled communications carrying undertones of conspiracy and cover-up. Ethan sleeps fitfully in the spare bedroom, his small body twitching beneath blankets that can't seem to keep him warm, no matter how high Robert sets the thermostat. Every hour or so, his voice drifts through the thin walls, fragments of conversations with invisible companions who speak in languages of pain and accusation. The words aren't always clear, but their emotional weight carries through the darkness like smoke from a distant fire. "Please don't leave me alone," he whispers around midnight, his voice carrying the careful pronunciation of someone much younger. "Mama said she'd come back, but it's getting dark and I'm scared." I recognize the cadence now, the way his vocal cords reshape themselves to carry messages from sources beyond normal perception. Each voice is distinct, different ages, different accents, different levels of terror and resignation. He's become a radio receiver tuned to frequencies that broadcast only final words and desperate pleas, collecting testimony from children who died trusting the wrong adults. By 3 in the morning, his condition has deteriorated to the point where Robert and I take turns sitting beside his bed, watching for signs that the supernatural burden might be causing physical damage. His pulse races like a bird trapped in a cage, his breathing shallow and rapid, his skin pale and clammy despite the room's warmth. Dark circles under his eyes have deepened into bruises that speak of exhaustion beyond anything sleep can cure. 7 more tonight, he murmurs when I check on him during a particularly violent nightmare. His eyes are open but unfocused, staring at something in the corner where shadows pool like spilled ink. They found the others. They're all talking at once now, trying to tell their stories before someone makes them stop. The voices are multiplying, growing stronger, becoming more insistent as word of our investigation spreads through whatever networks connect the living and the dead. Each name we've uncovered, each piece of evidence we've documented, seems to give permission for more testimony to emerge from the silence that institutional corruption has maintained for decades. I watch him grip the bedsheets with hands that shake like autumn leaves, his small fingers white-knuckled with the effort of anchoring himself to something solid in a world that keeps shifting beneath his feet. The boy is carrying more weight than any child should bear, serving as a conduit for accusations that will never see a conventional courtroom but demand justice from whatever forces govern the space between life and death. The brick on the coffee table catches streetlight through the front windows, its surface rough and red like dried blood. The message wrapped around it has been photographed, documented, filed away with all our other evidence, but the threat it represents continues to radiate through the house like heat from a furnace. Someone wanted us to know that our investigation has consequences, that asking the wrong questions brings attention from people who prefer their secrets buried with their victims. But threats assume that fear will stop progress, and we've already passed the point where backing down remains an option. The names carved into the memorial wall represent children who died believing that no one would remember them, that their stories would vanish into the administrative machinery that failed to protect them. Ethan's supernatural burden has given them voices again, transformed their silence into testimony that grows louder with each passing hour. Every cop in Greytown knows something significant is building. I can hear it in the radio chatter, see it in the way patrol cars linger longer on certain streets, feel it in the quality of silence that settles over the police station whenever certain names get mentioned. But knowing and acting occupy different territories in the landscape of institutional self-preservation, and most of these officers have families to protect and careers to consider. The storm outside mirrors the tension building within the town's power structure. Pressure systems colliding with forces that have remained stable for decades, creating atmospheric conditions that make everyone nervous, but that no one quite knows how to address. Change is coming whether anyone wants it or not, carried on winds that smell of rain and revolution, justice and retribution. Dawn approaches with the reluctant pace of someone bringing bad news, gray light filtering through clouds, heavy enough to crush whatever lies beneath them. The night has taught me that our investigation has reached a tipping point. We've gathered enough evidence to threaten the conspiracy, but not enough to destroy it completely. We exist in the dangerous space between ignorance and revelation, where knowledge becomes a weapon that cuts both ways. Something is coming. The air tastes of it, electric and sharp, like the moment before thunder splits the world open and lightning illuminates truths that prefer to remain hidden in darkness. Dawn breaks reluctantly over Greytown, filtering through clouds that hang like wet wool above the rooftops. The storm that's been threatening for days still holds its breath, but something else shatters the morning stillness. Robert's police radio erupting with static and urgency that jolts us both from the fragile sleep we'd managed to steal in the pre-dawn hours. Structure fire on Maple Street. The dispatcher's voice crackles through interference that makes every word sound like broken glass. Multiple units responding. Resident possibly trapped inside. The address hits us like cold water. Maple Street. Frank Donovan's address? Robert's already moving before the transmission ends, grabbing his keys and badge with the mechanical efficiency of someone who's spent decades responding to emergencies. But there's something different in his movements now, a tension that speaks of personal investment rather than professional duty. We both know this fire isn't coincidence. In a case built on shadows and secrets, flames that consume evidence carry their own significance. "Ethan," I call, but the boy is already standing in the hallway, dressed and ready as if he's been waiting for this exact moment. His pale face carries that listening expression I've learned to dread. But there's something else there too. A flicker of hope that I haven't seen in days of supernatural testimony and accumulated horror. The drive to Maple Street takes 7 minutes that feel like hours. Robert's Crown Vic, cutting through empty streets with sirens that split the morning air like accusations. Ethan sits between us, small hands gripping the seat cushion, his breathing rapid but controlled. Whatever voices he's hearing now, they're different. Urgent but not desperate, carrying messages that speak of possibility rather than finality. Smoke rises from Donovan's house like a prayer made of ash and regret, black columns twisting against gray sky with the deliberate intensity of something that burns from the inside out. Fire trucks surround the Victorian structure, their red lights painting the scene in colors that make everything look like the aftermath of violence. The crowd of neighbors and onlookers parts as we approach, recognizing Robert's uniform and my badge, but their faces carry expressions of people who know they're witnessing something more significant than a simple house fire. The flames have gutted the upper floors, orange tongues licking through shattered windows with appetite that suggests accelerant and intention rather than accident. Smoke pours from the roof in sheets that block out what little sunlight manages to penetrate the cloud cover, turning the morning into premature twilight that makes everyone's skin look jaundiced and sick. But it's not the fire that stops my breath in my throat. It's the small figure being led away from the burning structure by firefighters whose faces shine with the satisfaction of a successful rescue. The girl clutches a threadbare stuffed rabbit against her chest, her dark hair matted with smoke and her clothes torn from whatever desperate escape brought her out of the flames alive. Lily Torres, 8 years old, supposedly dead of heart failure, very much alive and standing in Frank Donovan's front yard like a ghost who decided to reclaim her mortality. Her eyes find mine across the chaos, and in that moment, I see recognition that shouldn't exist. She knows who I am, knows why I'm here, carries awareness that belongs to someone who's been waiting for exactly this rescue. When she speaks, her voice cuts through the noise of sirens and shouting with supernatural clarity that makes everyone within earshot stop and listen. "Thank you for listening," she says, her words directed at me, but carrying weight that encompasses everyone present. "Thank you for believing the voices when the grown-ups wouldn't." Ethan's reaction is immediate and profound. The boy who's been carrying the final words of murdered children for months suddenly sees one of those voices made flesh again. Proof that death isn't always final and that some stories can have different endings than the ones written by killers. His face crumples with relief so intense it looks painful, tears streaming down cheeks that have grown too pale from carrying impossible burdens. The firefighters who brought Lily out speak in hushed tones about finding her in the basement, locked in a room that shouldn't have existed according to building plans. She was dehydrated, terrified, but alive, kept as what they're calling evidence by someone who apparently intended to dispose of her when the investigation got too close. The fire was meant to destroy everything, including witnesses who could testify about systematic murder disguised as administrative oversight. But basements built for concealment sometimes protect what they're meant to hide. And the very isolation that made Lily Torres vulnerable also kept her safe when flames consumed the floors above. She survived because someone underestimated the structural integrity of Victorian construction and overestimated the reliability of fire as a tool for eliminating problems. Paramedics examine her with gentle efficiency, their hands checking for injuries, while their voices offer reassurances that sound like prayers answered after too many unanswered requests. She submits to their attention with the patient compliance of someone who's learned not to trust adult kindness completely, but her eyes never leave our small group, as if we represent something different from the authorities who failed her before. "She told me you would come," Lily says when I approach, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact certainty of a child who's learned to navigate impossible circumstances. "The girl with the braids. She said someone was finally listening to the voices." Jenny Morrison, the 7-year-old who supposedly drowned in 6 inches of bathwater. The voice that Ethan channeled just days ago, speaking words that belonged to sealed evidence and buried secrets. Somehow, in whatever space exists beyond death, murdered children have been coordinating their own rescue through the supernatural abilities of a traumatized boy who never asked to become their spokesperson. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If Lily Torres is alive, how many others might still be breathing? How many children reported dead exist in basements and hidden rooms, kept as insurance policies by killers who understand that living witnesses can be more valuable than corpses when properly controlled? The entire scope of this conspiracy expands beyond murder into kidnapping, human trafficking, systematic torture disguised as child welfare. Ethan approaches Lily with the careful reverence of someone meeting a miracle, his small hand extended in greeting but not quite touching, respecting boundaries that trauma establishes in the space between people. When she takes his hand voluntarily, the connection between them sparks with recognition that transcends normal human interaction. 2 children who've experienced different aspects of the same horror, finally finding someone who understands without explanation. "They're quieter now," Ethan whispers, his voice carrying wonder that replaces the mechanical quality of supernatural channeling. The voices, they're not so sad anymore. Behind us, Frank Donovan's house continues to burn, consuming evidence and eliminating hiding places with flames that feel like justice served through natural forces rather than institutional procedures. But for the first time since this investigation began, the fire illuminates hope instead of destroying it, revealing truth instead of concealing it. Lily Torres is alive. The dead can be rescued. The voices Ethan carries might represent children who can still be saved rather than souls who can only be avenged. Everything has changed. We find Frank Donovan in the backyard behind his burning house, sitting on wet grass with his hands cuffed behind his back and his head bowed like a man attending his own funeral. The fire chief must have pulled him from the flames before the structure became completely unstable, but his clothes still carry the acrid smell of smoke and something else, the sour stench of fear and desperation that clings to people when their carefully constructed worlds collapse in real time. 2 patrol officers flank him with the awkward posture of cops who aren't quite sure what they're guarding against. Donovan isn't trying to escape. He looks like a man who's finally stopped running from something that's been chasing him for decades. His gray cardigan is singed at the edges, and his wire-rimmed glasses sit crooked on his face, giving him the appearance of a confused librarian rather than someone who's spent years orchestrating the systematic murder of children. When he sees us approaching through the smoke-hazed chaos, his pale eyes focus with the slow recognition of someone emerging from shock. His lips move soundlessly for a moment, as if he's practicing words he's never expected to say out loud before the confession begins to spill from him like water from a broken pipe. "I only wanted to help," he mutters, his voice barely audible over the crackling flames and shouting firefighters. "They were suffering so much. The system was failing them, and I couldn't. I couldn't watch them endure what I endured when I was their age. The words carry the hollow ring of justification that sounds practiced, rehearsed, as if he's been having this conversation with himself for years. But underneath the rationalization, I hear something else. Genuine pain, the kind of deep trauma that festers in dark places until it transforms victims into perpetrators who convince themselves they're showing mercy rather than perpetuating cycles of abuse. Robert crouches beside him with the careful movements of someone approaching a dangerous animal, his voice taking on the professional calm that cops use when dealing with suspects who might be armed with more than weapons. Frank, we need to understand what happened here. We need to know about the children. Donovan's composure cracks like ice under pressure, and suddenly he's sobbing with the raw abandon of someone who's been carrying impossible weight for longer than human beings are designed to bear. Tears stream down his smoke-stained cheeks, cutting clean tracks through ash and regret, making him look younger and more fragile than his 61 years should allow. The mercy killings, he gasps between sobs, each word seeming to tear something loose inside his chest. That's what Eleanor called them. Said we were angels of mercy, saving children from lives that would only bring them more pain. Said the world was too cruel for damaged souls, that it was kinder to let them go peacefully than to watch them suffer. Eleanor, Judge Eleanor Price. The name hits me like cold water to the face, connecting dots I should have seen earlier. A family court judge with the power to oversee foster placements, to seal records, to ensure that inconvenient questions never reach the right ears. Someone positioned perfectly to coordinate systematic murder while maintaining the appearance of judicial oversight and child advocacy. She chose them, Donovan continues, his voice taking on the mechanical quality of someone reciting catechism learned through repetition and fear. Children who'd been too damaged by their experiences, who would never heal properly, who would only grow up to damage others. She had the psychological evaluations, the medical records, the family histories. She could predict which ones would never recover. The confession accelerates now, words tumbling over each other with the urgency of someone who's finally found permission to speak truths he's been carrying alone. He describes a network that reaches through every level of child welfare in the county. Social workers who identify vulnerable targets, foster families who serve as temporary holding facilities, medical examiners who write creative death certificates, and judges who ensure that investigations die before they can threaten the system. We saved them, he insists, looking up at me with eyes that burn with the fervor of someone who genuinely believes his own propaganda. We gave them peace. We ended their suffering before the world could destroy them completely. We were kind. I watch this broken man justify decades of child murder as acts of compassion and feel something cold settle in my stomach. This isn't simple evil, it's something worse. It's institutional malice disguised as mercy, systematic killing rationalized as rescue, genocide dressed up as social work. The kind of bureaucratic horror that happens when people convince themselves that their victims are better off dead. The evidence, I say, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. The recordings, the final words. How did you collect them? Donovan's face crumples further, and when he speaks, his voice carries shame deeper than anything I've heard in 30 years of interrogating killers. Eleanor wanted documentation. Said we needed proof that they went peacefully, that they forgave us for what we had to do. She made us record their final moments, their last words. Said it was for quality control. Quality control. As if murdered children were products coming off an assembly line, their deaths requiring documentation for efficiency purposes. The casual, bureaucratic language applied to systematic killing makes my skin crawl worse than any violent crime scene I've encountered. Behind us, the house continues burning, consuming evidence but also creating a kind of hellish backdrop for confession that feels appropriate. Flames lick through broken windows like tongues tasting secrets that have hidden too long in darkness, and smoke rises toward clouds that finally look ready to release the rain they've been holding for days. "Judge Price," Robert says, his voice tight with the controlled anger of someone who's spent his career trusting a system that's been systematically corrupted. "Where can we find her?" "Her chambers," Donovan whispers. "She'll be in her chambers reviewing files for tonight's emergency placement hearings. She never misses the emergency hearings. That's where she finds the ones who need mercy most." The implications hit like physical blows. Tonight, emergency hearings. More children identified as targets, more placements arranged, more mercy delivered to kids who trusted the system to protect them. Judge Eleanor Price is at work right now, selecting her next victims from case files that describe trauma and vulnerability in clinical language that transforms human suffering into administrative categories. Robert's already on his radio, calling for units to surround the courthouse to secure Judge Price's chambers before she can destroy evidence or disappear into whatever networks protect people with her level of institutional power. The response is immediate. Every cop in Greytown might not understand the full scope of what we've uncovered, but they recognize the urgency in Robert's voice and the weight of accusations that demand immediate action. 20 minutes later, while Frank Donovan sits in the back of a patrol car with his confession recorded and witnessed, we get confirmation that Judge Eleanor Price has been taken into custody in her chambers, surrounded by files that contain the names and photographs of children scheduled for emergency placement tonight. Children who would have disappeared into a system designed to kill them while maintaining plausible deniability about their deaths. The network is broken but not destroyed. Conspiracies this deep don't die easily. They adapt, relocate, find new faces to wear while continuing their work. But for the first time since this investigation began, the voices that Ethan carries represent testimony that will be heard in courtrooms rather than whispered in supernatural frequencies that only traumatized children can access. Justice, like rain, has been building pressure for a long time, and sometimes, when the atmospheric conditions finally align properly, both can fall with enough force to wash away years of accumulated debris. The system fights back like a cornered animal, all teeth and claws and desperate thrashing that draws blood from anyone foolish enough to believe that truth automatically leads to justice. Within 48 hours of Frank Donovan's confession and Judge Price's arrest, files begin disappearing from evidence lockers, witnesses develop sudden amnesia about conversations that never officially occurred, and lawyers descend on Greytown like well-dressed vultures with briefcases full of injunctions and cease-and-desist orders. The police department suspends Robert pending an internal investigation into his unauthorized use of resources and improper involvement with civilian consultants. The language is bureaucratic and sterile, but the message is clear. Cops who ask uncomfortable questions about institutional corruption will find their careers transformed into cautionary tales for anyone else considering similar indiscretions. 30 years of exemplary service becomes irrelevant when weighed against the convenience of administrative silence. My own situation deteriorates with surgical precision that speaks of professional attention to detail. The lawsuit arrives via certified mail, thick with legal terminology that translates roughly to "shut up or lose everything you own." Harassment, defamation, interference with ongoing investigations, violations of privacy laws that protect children. The accusations pile up like snow in a blizzard, each one designed to bury me under an avalanche of legal fees and procedural delays that could stretch for years. But it's the attacks on Ethan that make my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Local news runs a story about disturbed children who fabricate elaborate fantasies to gain attention from adults who should know better. Child psychologists appear on morning talk shows to discuss the dangers of encouraging delusional behavior in traumatized kids, speaking in clinical language that transforms supernatural testimony into pathological symptoms requiring intensive therapy rather than investigation. The boy who channeled the final words of murdered children becomes a sick fantasy in media coverage that focuses more on my mental health than the evidence we've uncovered. Reporters interview neighbors who describe me as obsessed and unbalanced, a washed-up ex-cop who exploits vulnerable children to feed delusions about conspiracies that exist only in his damaged psyche. They're rewriting the narrative in real time, transforming systematic child murder into the ravings of unstable adults who've traumatized an innocent boy with their paranoid fantasies. The machine that protects institutional corruption has shifted into damage control mode, sacrificing individual careers while preserving the larger system that enables continued abuse. But truth has a way of multiplying when it finally finds permission to speak, and the pressure we've created by naming names and recording confessions begins generating responses from quarters no one anticipated. Parents of children who died in foster care start calling Robert's house, their voices carrying the weight of grief that's been searching for explanations the system never provided. Former social workers reach out through intermediaries, offering information about cases that troubled them at the time, but that they were discouraged from pursuing. The first breakthrough comes from an unexpected source, Detective Maria Santos, whose 8-year-old niece disappeared into Frank Donovan's network 3 years ago. She's been carrying suspicions about her niece's accidental death, following leads on her own time while maintaining the appearance of accepting official explanations. When our investigation makes headlines, she decides that institutional loyalty matters less than family justice. Her press conference is brief but devastating. A 15-minute statement that lays out discrepancies in her niece's death that were buried by administrative pressure and bureaucratic inertia. She presents evidence that paints a picture of systematic cover-up, of investigations that were terminated before they could threaten important people, of a child who died alone because the adults charged with protecting her were more concerned with maintaining order than seeking truth. But the moment that breaks everything wide open comes from City Council member Thomas Chen, whose own brother disappeared into the foster system 20 years ago when they were both children. His voice shakes as he reads a letter on live television, words that Ethan supposedly could never have heard because they existed only in sealed juvenile records that were buried before digital storage made such secrets harder to lose. "I know someone will read this someday," Chen reads, his voice cracking with emotion that spans 2 decades of unanswered questions. "I know someone will want to know what happened to the boy who liked to draw pictures of birds. Tell my little brother Tommy that I tried to come home. Tell him I kept the drawing he made me, the one with the blue jay that looked like it was singing. Tell him I'm sorry I couldn't protect him the way I promised I would." The letter contains details that only existed in Tommy Chen's memory and his brother's sealed file. The blue jay drawing, the promise of protection, specific words that no investigation ever recorded because no one thought to ask the surviving sibling what his dead brother might have said in those final moments. But Ethan, sitting beside me on Robert's couch, begins repeating those exact words before Chen finishes reading them, his voice taking on the mechanical quality that signals supernatural channeling. The timing is too perfect, too precisely coordinated to be coincidence or coaching. Ethan recites details that Chen hasn't shared with anyone, memories that exist only in the space between a traumatized child's recollections and his brother's final thoughts. The validation is undeniable, broadcast live to thousands of viewers who watch a 10-year-old boy channel testimony from a source that rational explanation can't account for. The media narrative collapses like a house built on sand. Child psychologists who dismissed Ethan's abilities as fantasy suddenly find themselves unable to explain how a supposedly delusional boy can access information that exists only in sealed records and buried memories. The lawyers, with their cease and desist orders, discover that supernatural evidence doesn't respond to legal injunctions, that truth channeled through traumatized children carries weight that courtroom procedures can't dismiss. Phone calls flood police stations across 3 counties as parents, siblings, and survivors recognize patterns in their own experiences with Greytown's foster system. Former social workers break decades of silence to describe cases that troubled them, investigations that were terminated without explanation, children who vanished into administrative black holes that swallowed questions along with victims. The dam finally breaks when federal authorities announce they're launching their own investigation into systematic child abuse and murder involving county officials. Judge Eleanor Price's arrest has triggered federal oversight that can't be contained by local political pressure or institutional loyalty. The network that protected itself through careful coordination of local corruption, suddenly finds itself facing resources and authority that exist beyond their sphere of influence. Frank Donovan's confession becomes the foundation for charges that span decades and involve dozens of officials who thought their carefully maintained silence would protect them indefinitely. The recordings of children's final words, dismissed by defense attorneys as supernatural nonsense, become evidence that validates patterns of systematic killing disguised as mercy. The system that fought to protect itself discovers that some truths are too large to bury, too well documented to deny, too widely witnessed to explain away. The voices that Ethan carried from the space between life and death have finally found living ears willing to listen, and their testimony has become a chorus too loud for institutional denial to silence. Justice, like rain after a long drought, begins to fall with the weight of accumulated pressure and the precision of natural forces that can't be legislated or litigated into compliance. As justice begins its slow, grinding work through the machinery of federal investigations and grand jury proceedings, something fundamental shifts in Ethan's small frame, like pressure releasing from a valve that's been closed too tightly for too long. The voices that have tormented him for months grow quieter each day, their desperate urgency replaced by something that feels more like gratitude than accusation. His sleep comes easier now, uninterrupted by the supernatural testimony that once jolted him awake with other children's final words. The dark circles under his eyes fade from bruises to shadows, and his hands stop trembling with the constant awareness of carrying unbearable weight. He still tilts his head sometimes, listening to frequencies the rest of us can't access, but his expression has changed from pained concentration to peaceful attention, as if the voices have transformed from pleas for justice into expressions of thanks for services rendered. Lily Torres has been staying with us while federal authorities arrange long-term placement with relatives who live far enough from Greytown to ensure her safety. She and Ethan move through Robert's house like siblings who've shared experiences that created bonds deeper than biology, their quiet conversations carrying the understanding that exists between survivors who've seen too much but found their way back to something resembling childhood. Tomorrow morning, they'll leave for different destinations. Lily to reunite with an aunt in Oregon who never knew she was alive, Ethan to a foster family upstate that specializes in children with extraordinary circumstances. Federal marshals will escort them to new lives that hopefully include enough normalcy to let them forget, eventually, what it feels like to be conduits for the supernatural testimony of the dead. On this last night, when Robert has finally fallen asleep in his own bed for the first time in weeks, and the house settles into silence that carries peace instead of threat, Ethan finds me in the living room where I've been pretending to read case files that no longer need my attention. His small hand touches my shoulder with the gentle pressure of someone offering comfort rather than seeking it. "Can we go see them one more time?" he asks, his voice carrying the polite uncertainty of a child requesting permission for something important. "The wall. I want to say goodbye." The abandoned school crouches in darkness like a monument to forgotten promises, its broken windows reflecting streetlight in fragments that look like crystallized tears. We approach the building through shadows that feel protective rather than threatening, as if the entire structure has shifted from harboring secrets to preserving memories that deserve respect instead of fear. The basement stairs no longer creak with ominous warning. They simply announce our presence to whatever forces maintain vigil over the names carved into stone walls. The single bulb still hangs from the ceiling, casting light that illuminates the memorial wall with clarity that makes each letter stand out like individual prayers etched in rock by hands too small to reach very high. Ethan approaches the wall with reverence that belongs in cathedrals, his fingers tracing names that represent children who died, believing they would be forgotten, but who have become witnesses to systematic evil that can no longer hide behind institutional respectability. Sarah Chen and Marcus Webb, Jenny Morrison and David Kim, Lily Torres, whose name appears twice, once carved in stone when everyone believed she was dead, and now spoken aloud in gratitude for rescue that seemed impossible until it happened. "Most of them just wanted to be remembered," he says quietly, his small hand resting flat against stone that holds 47 names like a roster of the lost finally found. They were scared that dying would make them disappear completely, that no one would know they existed or that they mattered. His voice carries the weight of someone who served as spokesperson for the voiceless, translator for testimony that existed in frequencies beyond normal human perception. The supernatural burden that nearly broke him has also given him understanding that most adults never achieve. The knowledge that being forgotten is sometimes more terrible than dying, that leaving no trace of your existence transforms death from ending into erasure. "But they don't need to be scared anymore," he continues, his eyes closed as if he's listening to voices that speak in languages of gratitude rather than desperation. "People know about them now. People remember their names. People believe their stories." The basement grows quiet around us, but it's not the oppressive silence of secrets demanding to be told. It's the peaceful silence of testimony that has been heard and validated. The children whose voices Ethan carried for months have finally achieved what they died believing was impossible. Someone listened to their accusations, someone believed their stories, someone acted on their testimony to stop the machine that killed them. I watch this fragile boy offer comfort to ghosts who no longer need to carry the weight of unfinished business, and feel something shift in my own chest. A loosening of pressure I didn't realize I'd been carrying. The guilt that's haunted me since Sarah Chen's case went cold. The self-recrimination that's eaten at me for years of watching the system fail children who deserved better. All of it suddenly feels less like permanent damage and more like wounds that might actually heal given time and forgiveness. "She's here too," Ethan says suddenly, his voice taking on that mechanical quality that signals supernatural channeling, but gentler now, carrying love instead of accusation. Not carved in the wall, but here with the others. "She says you shouldn't blame yourself for things you couldn't control." My breath catches in my throat. I know, without asking, that he's speaking about my daughter. About Sarah, who died in a hospital bed with machines that couldn't save her, and medicine that couldn't cure what was eating her from the inside. The child I failed to protect, not through negligence or corruption, but through the simple human limitation of being powerless against cellular rebellion that no investigation could solve. "She says she knows you tried everything," Ethan continues, his small hand finding mine and gripping it with warmth that feels like connection across impossible distance. She says the cancer wasn't your fault, that good parents can't always protect their children from everything, that love doesn't make you omnipotent. The words hit me like absolution delivered from sources beyond normal understanding, forgiveness offered by someone who has the authority to grant it because she lived through what I couldn't prevent. For years, I've carried the weight of feeling like I failed her by not solving the unsolvable, by not defeating an enemy that existed in her own cells rather than in the corruption of human institutions. She said you shouldn't blame yourself, Ethan whispers, his voice now clearly his own, but carrying echoes of supernatural grace. She forgave you a long time ago, and she hopes you can forgive yourself too. The tears come without warning, decades of accumulated guilt finally finding permission to flow out of me like water from a broken dam. I kneel in that basement beside a traumatized child who served as messenger for the dead, surrounded by names of children who found justice through supernatural testimony, and finally allow myself to grieve not just for my daughter, but for the father I could never be despite loving her more than life itself. For a moment, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, I swear I feel her presence in that stone chamber, not accusatory or disappointed, but proud of the man who never stopped fighting for children, even when he couldn't save his own. The warmth that spreads through my chest feels like absolution, like the lifting of burdens I've carried so long I'd forgotten they weren't permanent parts of my skeleton. Standing in that memorial to murdered children, holding hands with a boy who channels voices from beyond death, I finally understand that some forgiveness comes from sources we never expected, and that healing sometimes requires accepting grace we feel we don't deserve. The storm finally breaks on a Tuesday morning, releasing rain that falls with the gentle persistence of tears that have been held too long. The clouds that have pressed down on Greytown for weeks finally open, washing the streets with water that carries away ash from burned houses and the metallic taste of institutional corruption that has poisoned the air for too long. The rain is clean and cold, drumming against windows with rhythms that sound like healing rather than threat. I stand at Robert's kitchen window, watching water stream down glass in patterns that blur the outside world into impressionist paintings of renewal and possibility. The thunderstorm that meteorologists predicted never materialized. Instead, the precipitation falls with steady purpose, soaking into earth that has been waiting for this cleansing, as long as the children's voices have been waiting for someone to listen. The federal investigation continues its methodical work, unsealing records and questioning witnesses whose silence has protected institutional evil for decades. Judge Eleanor Price remains in custody pending trial, her courtroom sealed, and her dockets reassigned to judges who hopefully understand that child welfare requires more than administrative efficiency. Frank Donovan's confessions have triggered arrests across 3 counties, unraveling a network that reached deeper into the system than anyone imagined possible. But institutional change moves with glacial slowness, grinding forward through bureaucratic resistance and legal challenges that will take years to resolve completely. The system is wounded, perhaps mortally, but wounded things don't always die. Sometimes they adapt, finding new ways to protect themselves while maintaining the appearance of reform. Real change requires vigilance that extends beyond headlines and grand jury indictments, constant attention to ensure that new monsters don't simply wear different faces while continuing the same work. Still, something fundamental has shifted in Greytown's relationship with its most vulnerable citizens. Social workers speak more carefully about children in their care, police officers ask harder questions about deaths that seem too convenient, and foster families undergo scrutiny that looks beyond surface credentials to examine motivations and histories. The voices that Ethan carried from the supernatural realm have created echoes in the living world that make it harder for systematic abuse to hide behind administrative normalcy. The children are leaving today, Federal marshals arrived before dawn to escort Ethan and Lily to new lives that hopefully include enough distance from Greytown to let them forget the supernatural horrors they've witnessed and endured. Their small suitcases sit by Robert's front door like promises of futures that might include normalcy, safety, and the kind of childhood that doesn't require carrying other people's final words. Ethan moves through the house with the careful attention of someone memorizing details he wants to preserve, his small hands touching furniture and walls that have sheltered him during the worst period of his young life. But his face carries hope now instead of the haunted expression that marked him when this investigation began. The voices that tormented him have faded to whispers, then to silence, their supernatural testimony no longer needed now that living people have taken up their cause. Lily Torres clutches her threadbare rabbit with one hand and Ethan's fingers with the other, the two children bound by shared experience of surviving things that should never happen to anyone, especially those too young to understand why adults sometimes become monsters. Her dark eyes carry wariness that will probably never completely fade, but also curiosity about worlds that exist beyond basement prisons and systematic abuse. "Will you be okay?" Ethan asks me as the federal marshals perform final security checks on their vehicles. His voice carries the concerned uncertainty of someone who's learned to worry about adults as much as they worry about him. The question catches me off guard, requiring honesty about things I'm still learning to understand. Will I be okay? The investigation has cost me financially, professionally, and emotionally, leaving me with fewer resources but somehow more hope than I've felt in years. The forgiveness I received in that basement memorial has loosened knots in my chest that I'd forgotten weren't permanent, creating space for possibilities I'd stopped allowing myself to imagine. "I think so," I tell him, surprised by the truthfulness of the answer. "I think we all will be, eventually." The children climb into the federal vehicle with movements that speak of trust, cautiously extended to adults who've proven worthy of it through actions rather than promises. Ethan turns to wave goodbye through the rear window, his small face pressed against glass that reflects morning light with crystalline clarity. Lily sits beside him, her rabbit secured safely in her lap, both of them looking forward rather than backward as the car carries them toward futures that remain unwritten but no longer predetermined by institutional malice. I watch them disappear around the corner where Foster Row meets Main Street, two small figures who survived systematic evil and helped expose corruption that would have continued claiming victims indefinitely. Their supernatural testimony has become legal evidence. Their impossible voices have been heard in courtrooms and congressional hearings. Their stories have found believers among people with the power to create change. Robert stands beside me on his front porch, both of us silent as the rain continues its patient work of washing Greytown clean. His suspension has been lifted pending federal review, his badge restored along with his faith that good police work sometimes leads to actual justice. The investigation has marked him, aged him in ways that show around his eyes, and in the careful way he moves through a world that revealed itself to be more fragile than he'd believed possible. "Think they'll be all right?" he asks, his voice carrying the hollow echo of someone who's learned not to trust easy answers about the safety of children. I consider the question seriously, weighing what I know about trauma against what I've witnessed about resilience. Ethan and Lily have seen horrors that will mark them forever, but they've also demonstrated strength that allowed them to survive experiences designed to destroy them. They carry scars, but they also carry each other's understanding, and sometimes shared wounds heal better than solitary ones. They'll have nightmares, I say, watching the rain transform dust into mud that will eventually become the foundation for new growth. They'll have trust issues and hypervigilance and all the symptoms that come with surviving what they survived. But they'll also have each other, and they'll have people who believe their stories without requiring proof that violates the laws of physics. The rain begins to lighten, shifting from downpour to gentle precipitation that whispers against leaves and sidewalks with sounds like distant conversation. The storm has passed, leaving behind air that tastes clean and possibilities that feel more real than they did when clouds press down on everything like institutional weight designed to prevent change. For the first time in months, I allow myself to believe that listening to the echoes of the lost might be enough to break the silence that protects institutional evil from consequences. The children's voices that Ethan carried from supernatural realms have found amplification in living throats, creating testimony that courtrooms can hear and juries can evaluate according to standards of evidence that exist in written law rather than bureaucratic convenience. Sometimes justice requires supernatural intervention to penetrate institutional denial. Sometimes the dead must speak through traumatized children to reach living ears that have learned to filter out inconvenient truths. Sometimes the impossible becomes the only path to the inevitable. The rain continues falling, washing Greytown toward whatever comes next.